here perhaps a touch of frost. Otherwise, a mild start for many of us tomorrow morning. As we go through the day itself, again, the cloud may be thick enough for some rain. Perhaps in the southwest, some outbreaks of rain moving through, also across parts of Northern Ireland, and even elsewhere, 1 or 2 spots can't be ruled out. But I think for many, it may be a slightly brighter day than today, a greater chance of seeing some sunshine, especially towards the north and east of Scotland, and temperatures once more, well, on the mild side for the time of year. Bye-bye.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're giving you the chance to win everything you need to celebrate the festivities. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Maria, potholes, the bane of everybody that uses the road, whether you're a car driver or a cyclist. As a cyclist, are even worse. How have we got into this situation where our roads are in such a bad state?
Well, part of it is to do with actually our climate. In somewhere like, say, Sweden, like the snow will fall on the ground, it will stay there for months. Whereas here we've got what's called a freeze-thaw climate, where the water comes down, then we might have a cold snap and it freezes, and the water within the pothole will then expand and make the pothole bigger. Then we might have a mild spell, and then that process repeats. So, we do actually need extra funding to acknowledge the fact that, we just live in a climate where we're sort of particularly vulnerable to potholes.
Why? I mean, the fact that this happens, these weather conditions happen, is no great surprise to anybody. Why has the problem been ignored for so long?
I think what's happened is we've had like short-term funding. So it's like, oh, there's a pothole, let's patch it up. Oh, there's another one, let's patch it up. But the patches aren't actually really that strong, so then they break down again. So, really what we need is to have roads completely resurfaced, and then they'll just be pothole-free for a very long time. And that really is how funding should be. That's the direction funding should go in, as opposed to just sort of like dribs and drabs here and there. Do you think this government are going to be good for the motorist, or is there indeed a war on the motorist still? The different parties come in and they've all got different policies that they wheel out, then they cancel the policies, and then there's so much lack of transparency. Like, for example, with the pothole issue, sometimes the government, whichever government is in office, will do some big showboating about how they're going to give X amount of potholes, and you still think that sounds really good.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning, I'm Olivia Utley alongside Ben Leo, and this is Saturday Morning Live.
Very good morning to you. Great to have your company this morning, and we've got an action-packed special show as the Tory leadership race is decided today.
Coming up over the next 2 hours, we'll bring you all the lead-up analysis and ultimately the result everyone has been waiting for after months of battling away between the 2 final Tory leadership candidates.
Will it be Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch who comes out on top as leader of the Conservative Party? Two hours of action-packed analysis and reaction. The big result comes at 11 a.m. We'll be going live to London for the announcement. And, Olivia, it's an important day for the Tories and the future of the party.
Well, it's a very important day. People have been saying it's a sort of fight for the life and soul of the Conservative Party as they decide whether to sway to the left, get those Lib Dem votes back, or sway to the right and try and bring reform voters over. And, of course, on this very important day, we want to hear from you. We would love to hear what you think. Send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/yoursay.
Massive 2 hours coming up, but before we do anything else, Lewis Mackenzie has all your news headlines. Thank you very much, team. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. Now, as you've just heard, the new leader of the Conservative Party will be announced today at 11 o'clock here on GB News. Either Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick will succeed Rishi Sunak as the leader of the opposition. Both candidates say they would serve in each other's shadow cabinets if they lost the contest. This comes as the Conservatives have regained a poll lead over Labour for the first time in 3 years. 6 teenagers have been arrested after a 13-year-old girl was found with multiple stab wounds at the side of a major road in East Yorkshire. Police say she was found on the A63 in Hessel with life-threatening injuries, including lacerations to her neck, abdomen and chest. 4 boys and 2 girls aged between 14 and 17 were arrested in a nearby wooded area and are being questioned on suspicion of attempted murder. Police believe the attackers knew the victim and the girl remains in hospital in critical condition. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky has renewed calls for the UK and US to allow his troops to use Western long-range missiles. In recent weeks, North Korea has continued to deploy more soldiers into Russia to fight in the war, with Defence Secretary John Healey warning the growing alliance between North Korea and Moscow is worrying. Now, more than 5,000 migrants arrived in the UK after crossing the Channel in October, making it the busiest month of the year so far. According to the Home Office figures, 230 people have made the journey in 5 boats on Thursday, which brings the total number of arrivals recorded last month to 5,417. It comes after the 10th death this month was recorded on Wednesday, with the total number of people who have died while trying to cross the Channel this year to 50. Well, to Spain now, where rescue teams are continuing to search for bodies after flash flooding swept through large areas of the country. Crews are continuing to search for bodies in stranded cars and buildings following the flash floods, as authorities deal with the worst flooding in the country in decades. With dozens of people still missing, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has declared the area a disaster zone. The Spanish government has now confirmed 205 deaths so far. And finally, a US Navy veteran has become the first professional Santa Claus in the world to be fitted with a bionic arm. Mike Tyndall of Tennessee he had his left forearm amputated in 1994 after an automatic wood saw accident. When he received the bionic arm from the Bristol-based company Open Bionics, he said, "When I first saw the red design, I knew it was perfect. It even matches my Santa suit." Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Live now to the Tory leadership event, where we're joined by GB News political editor Chris Hope, who's with Andrew Griffith, the MP for Arundel and South Downs and Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. Tell us more, Chris.
That's right. Morning, Olivia. Morning, Ben. Yeah, we're here in central London for the final result after 3 months of waiting of the new Tory leader, and it comes with a good poll here for the Tory party today, with everything going in the right direction. The Tories are 1 point ahead of Labour, up 4, Labour down 2, and crucially for me, Reform down 3 at 17 points. There's almost a perfect gift for this new leader, if it's Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch. But joining me now is Andrew Griffiths. He's, of course, a supporter of Kemi Badenoch. Andrew Griffiths, a quick one for the viewers. Who's won?
Good morning, Chris. Good to be with you. We're all going to have to wait, what is it, about 55 minutes. I've got the same butterflies in my stomach that many people will have. Look, I've always been quietly optimistic that Kemi would win. The interactions that I've seen with members, the fact that she's always seemed to me the best answer to the question that we've had right now, which is how do we reunite, re-equip ourselves ready for government. So we'll have to find out. But, you know, hopeful. I'm hopeful.
By my maths, 80 MPs or 79 MPs don't back Kemi Badenoch, 80 don't back Robert Jenrick. So 2/3 of the parliamentary party don't support the new leader. That's a bit of a nightmare, isn't it?
Well, I think 121 Conservative MPs sitting across the benches looking at the absolute horror show that was the Labour budget last week are very keen that we all unite, we all roll up our sleeves and get down to work on Monday, take the fight to Labour, and as quickly as possible, and having built credible plans, get ready for government.
But do you worry that some of the big beasts are leaving the front bench? James Cleverly won't be part of the new shadow team. Jeremy Hunt's off. Rishi Sunak, I'm sure, is in Yorkshire, not the front bench. With Oliver Dowden, probably certainly not. You have to create a new team, don't you, around the new leader?
Well, look, the process of any party, any human talent organisation is obviously renewing its talent over time. Yeah. But all of the people you've mentioned have said that they're going to make a contribution from the backbenches. All of them are as motivated as anyone could ever be to unite the right, to get us back into government, obviously learn the mistakes as well that were made in the past. So I actually have no concerns on that score. No. This Labour government is such a horror show. That budget absolutely showed where their values are, and there is a very clear difference between what the direction they're leading the country and the direction all of the Conservative members of Parliament and the wider party want to go in.
A quick one, what job have you been offered? You're being tipped for being Shadow Chancellor if Kemi Badenoch wins.
Look, with 121 of us, Chris, and you know this, we've all got to roll up our sleeves. I'm going to do whatever I can to support whoever is the leader, because it's a really important job that we've been sent to Parliament to do now.
Is it possible to overturn this 171 majority of Labour's got in one term? It'd be historic if it happened, wouldn't it?
Well, we lost, sad to say, Chris, but we lost our majority of 80 in one term. To govern, you only need a majority of one. You can see already after an unprecedented, 120 days, just how catastrophically the Labour ratings have fallen. Keir Starmer's ratings, looking at last week's budget, which is still being digested and unpicking day by day. So, yeah, I really do believe that. We've got to get ourselves ready. We've got some proper learnings to make as well about why we weren't able to deliver the things that people wanted in power, lower crime, closing the borders, all of those things. So we've got to make sure we're ready for government, but I absolutely believe we can overturn that.
And the key point is, how do you restore trust? And how do you restore trust? That's the key question for so many voters who felt that you let them down on taxation, immigration and the like.
Well, you start by being honest about what we didn't get right, but being honest also about some of the problems that the country faces. Didn't see that last year, week in the budget. What you actually saw is more debt being piled on top of the debt that's already there, and then making sure that we've got credible plans to address those issues. So we get back into government. What are we going to do differently that makes people think that they can trust us with their vote?
Yeah. A big challenge. Andrew Griffiths, thank you. And the members arriving here in central London. We'll get the result to you live on GB News from 11 o'clock. We'll hear from Bob Blackman, the 1922 committee chairman. He's run this contest. Richard Fuller, the party chairman, before that. And then finally, 11:10, the winning candidate will make a speech, and that'll be over. Then, of course, the hard yards start in uniting this party behind the leader and try and take the fight to Labour.
OK, Chopper, thanks very much for that. Yes, indeed, the excitement building. 50 minutes until the big announcement comes at 11 o'clock. We'll be there live. We're joined now in the studio by the former chief advisor to Nadeem Zahawi, James Price, pollster and director of JL Partners, Scarlett Maguire, and the former Armed Forces Minister and Labour MP, Bill Rammell. Good morning to you all. Thank you for joining us. James, I'll start with you. A few people this morning, maybe disenfranchised Conservatives, have said to me they don't care about this leadership race. It doesn't matter because the Tories are finished. I argue it does matter because they are still the party of opposition. They have a key role to play in the coming years. Does today matter?
Yeah, it absolutely matters. You only have to see there was one poll out yesterday that shows that the Conservatives, without having been a meaningful opposition for a little while now, are already, once again, more popular than the Labour Party. And that's nothing necessarily to do with what the Conservatives have done. It's all the kind of catastrophic behaviour of the Labour Party, that budget that is coming unravelling, that is going to mean lower growth and all the other kind of stuff that GBNews has done a very good job at pointing out of the horror of what Labour have done in office so far. And the Conservatives are still the second biggest party. They've still got the best opportunity, I think, of getting Labour out again, whether that's in an outright majority in a few years' time, whether that's something ends up happening with reform, whatever that may be. They've still got the best chance of that. And they're also still a party that has both a philosophical underpinning and history to it, and it's got experience of actually being in government and formulating policy. That's not something that the other parties have really got, and that's a very hard thing to rebuild again. If the Conservatives were to disappear overnight, there's no one else that has a decent theory of how you can run a government, how you can improve things, and has that kind of expertise. So we've got to hope that this matters and that this new leader of the opposition will have a good couple of years.
Scarlett, this has obviously been a very, very long campaign. 14 weeks feels like a lot longer. I think everyone's nodding away at that. How do you feel the Conservatives have conducted themselves during this campaign? Obviously, in previous campaigns, there's been lots and lots of fallouts, lots of infighting. Is it a bit different this time?
I think it is different. I think that's partly because there's been less of a spotlight on it. So I think, firstly, the public aren't that interested in it. And secondly, the media haven't been that interested in covering it. You could say it might be, come the other way around in terms of the sort of order of those things. But I think, in general, it's not broken through into public consciousness for all the wrong reasons, which I think is something that we saw quite a lot of, for example, in the Truss-Sunak contest, I think also in the Johnson-Hunt contest as well. And I think it's been kept sort of a lot more under wraps than that, and it's been sort of boiling away. I don't know necessarily whether that's a good thing. I mean, I think it's a good thing they're not making too many headlines for the wrong reasons, for taking chunks out of each other. But I do think it's been a strange vacuum in Conservative leadership, especially when Labour's been struggling in the polls, which it undeniably has done in the first 100 days. There's not much going on there, and I think there could have been a bit more to take back.
Well, Kemi is the favourite to win, and we really haven't heard very much from her at all. How do you think that's going to play with the public? Is she going to stick with trying to not do very many media interviews if she does become leader of the opposition?
I mean, I think it's a tricky question, because one of the biggest jobs the leader of the opposition has to do is to achieve media cut-through and to sort of dominate the airwaves and take the conversation to them, especially when the party is so small in Parliament, because newspapers, television stations won't naturally be covering them in quite the same way that they are used to, having been in power in 14 years. However, we have seen with Kemi that it's not always a good thing when she does get that sort of cut-through. For example, the maternity pay comments, I think, was the thing that most people have noticed from this Conservative leadership contest. That is not the best thing to be putting to the public.
Bill Rammell, come on then. Who would your lot prefer to be leading the opposition? Who would Starmer want to see at the dispatch box? The likes of Michael Gove, by the way, just reckon he says that Kemi Badenoch would be harder for Sir Keir Starmer to do battle with, as opposed to sort of posh Tory boy Robert Jenrick.
I think that may be true, but look, objectively, I don't think either of them are making the noise, making the critique of the Tory party that they need to. They're both from the radical right of the Tory party, and they need someone who's going to take the Tory party by the lapels and drag them kicking and screaming back to the mainstream of British politics. And I see no sense of that. If you ask me who's going to be the more challenging, I think Badenoch would, but not because of her own strengths, but because Jenrick has presented himself really as an extreme right-winger, a Nigel Farage tribute act, and I don't think the Tories can win from
Bill,
that.
can you tell me what's extreme about Jenrick? A particular policy or something he said that's extreme in your book?
Leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, which is supported by 66% of British people, as a live-or-die issue. I mean, it's extremist nonsense.
But he wants to do that to stop the small boats, which arguably is a national security threat. So in that context, is that extreme or is it just sensible?
No, I don't think it's sensible because, the European Convention on Human Rights supports people, individuals. It doesn't support states. And I think as long as the Tory party is out on a limb, it won't win over the mainstream of British politics.
I mean, you say it's out on a limb and you say that the sort of received wisdom is that the Tory party should move back to the centre. And I can see the argument for that. The Lib Dems won 72 seats in the election, 71, I think, actually. Didn't win Jeremy Hunt's seat. And so there is an argument for that. But also, of course, surely there is an argument to pick up some of those Reform votes. Reform did extraordinarily well in the last election. Yes, they only picked up 5 MPs, but for a brand new party, it felt like momentum was there. Is it really so unreasonable that the Conservatives have picked 2 right-wing candidates as their favourite choices?
But if you look at the detailed polling evidence, reform repels about 2 voters for every 1 that it attracts. And if you pitch your wagons as just aping reform and Nigel Farage, yes, you might win back, although the polling evidence doesn't suggest that will happen. You might win back a handful of votes, but you will repel many more in the centre ground. And you said it, you know, they lost many more seats to the Liberal Democrats than they did to Reform.
Well, Bill, polling overnight suggests that the Tories are now ahead of Labour, and that's without, you know, a leader, effectively.
And so, on the same day, there's a separate poll putting Labour 6% ahead. Look, I'm not going to say that the first 3.5 months have been perfect, but I think the budget, the investment in the health service, the investment in housing, in local government, issues that people care about, once that starts to bite, I think you will see things
James, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that anyone can say that this budget is going to be a success. I mean, growth is going to be lower as a result of it, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, than beforehand.
A lot higher than it was under the last
the massive tax hikes that are going to drive a lot of people out of this country, the kind of wealth creators we need to fund those sorts of public services will just leave, and that's something that the Labour Party doesn't seem to understand at all. And then the general kind of malaise of extra regulation to make life more difficult and more unpleasant that's going to come as a result of this. I think all that means that when we come to the next general election, we're going to be looking at a very different potential kind of electoral map. Will reform still be popular? Will they not? Will the Lib Dem voters regret having let Labour in? All these sorts of questions will be very different, and therefore I think we're going to be at risk otherwise of fighting the last war rather than what the next election is going to be fought on.
Scott, I think that's a really interesting point that James raises there about the sort of electoral map changing. The received wisdom, you know, 6 months ago was that if Keir Starmer won this sort of majority that he has indeed won, he would be in office for at least 2 terms. Now, this polling, and I know there are lots of different polls saying lots of different things, but it's not looking so good for Labour. Do you think we could see a sort of shifting of the electoral map where, amazingly, you see a shock result where the Conservatives do win the next election?
Yeah, so I'll take voting intention polls just first off, just to both your points, which is that it's not hugely helpful to look at individual voting intention polls this far out of an election. It is more useful to look at approval ratings for leaders and for issues, none of which make nice reading for Labour, it has to be said. But I think one thing you can consistently read into voting intention polls, and indeed the election result itself, is that the electoral map is changing and we are moving towards a more fragmented European-style politics, but still constrained within our first-past-the-post system. And one thing that is noticeable is that in the last few polls, most of them have shown all major parties, in fact all parties, being under 30% of the vote. Now, if I was the Conservatives, I would not be celebrating being the most, leading the most under 30%, because actually we've seen from Keir Starmer already, who won 34% of the vote at the general election. That is a hard place to govern from because you do not have a lot of the public with you. And if the main parties are going to succeed, they need to be aiming to get much more of the vote than that.
OK, panel, hold your thoughts. We're going to go live to the leadership contest in London. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, is there with GBNews superstar Camilla Tominey. Chris, over to you.
Ben and Olivia, hi. Yeah, welcome back to this central London location, this hotel, where we'll be hearing the result of the Tory leadership campaign. Finally, in just under an hour's time, we'll know who the winner is. It's been a long, long wait. And with me now is Camilla Tominey, known to our viewers from her brilliant Sunday morning show. Camilla, who's won?
Well, I think it might be Kemi. I mean, I'm judging it by Con Home polls and Telegraph polls, and I don't know whether that's the right thing to do. But in all of the Telegraph polls online, and bear in mind they do get participated in by thousands of readers, she's well ahead, and she's always been well ahead. So she does seem to be the grassroots favourite. However, I'll say this for Jenrick: he has worked very, very, very hard. You cannot doubt that man's ability to graft, because he has been the length and breadth of the country, tapping up Tory associations and really trying to make his case. But I just think, I mean, to be honest, the membership have got almost the perfect choice, because they wanted a righty. They didn't want a one-nationer in there, cleverly got knocked out. So any eventuality for them, I think, is good. Although both have been mischaracterised as far righties, they're not. No. They're quite moderate people. Yes. You know, this is a convenient attack line by Labour.
But the idea of the uni party talked about on social media, i.e. that the Labour and the Tory party are basically the same thing, that's for the birds now after the budget last week. I mean, that was a really left-wing budget and the right-wing leader to be elected today.
Yeah, but who on earth ever thought that the Labour government was going to be remotely right-wing? I mean, Keir Starmer's 2020 leadership pitch was like a Ken Loach movie. I mean, you've then got Rachel Reeves channeling Gordon Brown, of all people, God bless her. So the backlash against the budget, I think, is really interesting. You've seen the polling today, Chris. Suddenly we've got the Tories inching ahead of Labour for the first time, I think, in 2 years. 29% plays 28. I think the backlash from farmers is going to really, really hurt Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. I think also this rising tide of anger about these NIC contributions in the healthcare sector.
Yeah.
So the NHS and the public sector are immune from those changes. But when you look at private health cover provided by people like care homes, hospices that are charities not run by the NHS, they're going to be absolutely clobbered. And you have to ask yourself, if this is the party that's meant to represent elderly and vulnerable people, they've made a catastrophic error with that policy.
Okay. And just quickly, Camilla, shout out for your show tomorrow morning, 9:30 a.m. Will the winner be on it?
I really hope so, because we have pitched both camps, and I'm pretty confident that we will have the winner on. We're also going to be speaking to a panel about the winner. We're going to go over to America and cover next week's election and speak to somebody there. And we've got Kwasi Kwarteng on to analyse Labour's budget and whether it might be, well, another budget fiasco.
Tune in. You heard it there from the presenter, Camilla Tominey, 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. The Camilla Tominey Show. It'll be a must-watch for all of us.
Well, thank you very much to Camilla and to our panel, and they'll be back with lots more to come in just a few minutes. We'll be speaking to the Labour MP Peter Swallow just after the break, so see you in 3 minutes.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
I'm joined now by an acknowledged authority on Ludwig van Beethoven. He's already written 7 books on the subject, and next week his 8th is released. It's called In Search of Beethoven, and it stands apart as a deeply personal account of John Souché's relationship with the great composer as he follows his footsteps from Bonn to Vienna. Yes, I introduce author, journalist and classic FM presenter John Souché.
Hello, Michael.
It's delightful to have you here, and you have, as I say, written now 8 books on Beethoven. So the question is, why Beethoven?
Well, the word that is often used that I don't like is obsession, obsessive, because somehow there's something not quite right about that. The word that I use is passion. I have a passion for this man's life and music that began, I suppose, around 50 years ago, sometime in my early 20s. I can't remember the exact moment. He kind of crept up on me, and suddenly, as I was a journalist, TV journalist all my life, but before that I was a failed musician. I wanted to be a professional musician, but fortunately for the world of music, I realised I didn't have the talent. But this man's music crept up on me, and I knew from then that it would not go away, it would only increase, and that is what's happened. There are other composers I will listen to, minor names like Mozart, Wagner, Haydn, but Beethoven just does it for me. I was highly educated musically at school because I loved it, to the extent that I wanted to turn professional, but as I say, I didn't have the talent, but that has stayed with me. I read music, I understand music, as you say, I play the trombone, in those days to quite a high level.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you for all your comments and your views on gbnews.com/yoursay. We will get stuck into them very shortly, but we're joined now by Peter Swallow, the Labour MP for Bracknell. Good morning, Peter. Are you concerned about who may win today's leadership contest? Who would you prefer as a Labour MP? Who would you rather be battling at the dispatch box?
I mean, who
whoever the Conservative Party choose, I think it's just really welcome that we're going to have a leader of the opposition because, ultimately, the way that government works in this country is it is now for the Labour Party as the party of government to set forward our bold vision, and we do need an opposition who's able to get up and challenge us. And over the last 4 months, whilst we've been waiting for this leadership contest to eventually conclude, we've just not had that opposition, and it's not good for democracy. So it's for the Conservative members to choose who their leader is. It's not for me. I'm certainly not a Conservative member, but I do welcome the fact that we will have a return to how it should work. Now my concern is whether either Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch is actually up to that really important job of holding this government to account.
What do you make of this poll that puts the Labour Party on just 28% of the public vote in voting intentions? Does that worry you at all, or had you all sort of factored that in when you knew what the budget was going to say?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's one poll. There's another poll out today that has us on 36%, way ahead of the Conservatives.
36% is still quite low, though.
Look, you can always cherry pick one poll or another to say one thing or another. I think what really matters is the effect that this budget has, what we can do to invest in our public services, to get the economy back in a stable footing, to get that growth that we really need to invest in this country. That's what matters, not one poll or another.
What element of the budget do you think will deliver growth for the UK in the next few years?
We've got a huge investment in house building, which is not only really important for my constituents who are facing a housing crisis, but it's also going to stimulate growth in the housing sector. We've also invested in the green energy sector, a huge growth opportunity for the UK. We can be world leading in this emerging sector and really help to tackle the energy crisis that we're facing. This is a budget that is built to stimulate the economy, to get that growth, to fix the foundations of our economy. It's a budget for the future.
But Peter, you're talking about growth and your party throws the term around, week after week. But by Rachel Reeves' own forecast, she announced it in Parliament, the growth forecast is paltry, to say the least. I mean, it's not really growth, is it?
Well, look, I think we all recognise that we need more investment, and we're working hard with the private sector to get that in. I know the OBR forecast weren't able to factor in the planning reforms, which are still in draft, and that's going to stimulate more growth. There is more to be done, and I'm not complacent about that. This is a government that will continue to pursue growth, continue to go for it. Absolutely.
Rachel Reeves has said that she doesn't want taxes to go up again, but given that growth isn't looking that promising over the next 5 years, lots and lots of economists are actually saying that taxes will have to rise to avoid very, very deep department spending cuts, which no one wants. How would you feel about taxes rising again in the next budget?
Rachel Reeves has been clear that we will be that she will be asking departments to make efficiency savings to make sure that every penny of public money is being put to good use. But that's really the question for these Tory leadership contenders today, whether it's Kemi or Robert who become leader in an hour or so. That's the question that they need to answer. If they disagree with our tax policy, they have to say what public sector cuts they want to see in order to pay for tax cuts. And if they want to see more investment in public sector, they have to say how they're going to raise the money from taxes or elsewhere to pay for those challenges. That is the reality of being in government, making difficult choices, and this was a tough budget. That is the reality that the incoming leader of the Conservative Party is going to have to own up to, because frankly, they're not at the moment being honest with the British people when they oppose some very sensible measures.
OK, Peter, thank you for your time this morning. Really appreciate it, and we'll catch up with you soon. Bill Rammell, I have some comments for you from our lovely viewers. Let's have a quick one here. James says, just on leaving the ECHR, you called it extremist. James says, leaving the ECHR as extremist, anything that lefties don't like is now described as extremist. You forgot to include far right. How is leaving the ECHR extremist, Bill?
Because it's, you know, the ECHR was created by Britain. The founding fathers of it were British judges.
How many years ago? Nearly a century ago.
Yeah. And it was put in place to protect people from oppression. It does not stop us. It doesn't stop us dealing with migration. The ECHR was in place when the last Labour government cut illegal migration significantly, and I just think it's an unnecessary extreme position to put forward and to pitch your whole leadership on it, which is what I think Robert Jenrick has done. I just think he's out of touch.
Our member Helen says that there's plenty of countries, Bill, outside Europe who are working democracies who don't have the ECHR. Why can't we be like them? Or have a British
the only two who've left are Belarus and Russia. Is that really the company you want
Come on,
to
this
be?
isn't fair at all. The United States of America, Canada, Australia, Japan, all these very modern civilized countries don't need to be a part of this thing in order to enshrine rights. After the Second World War, yes, Britain was the architect of this to help other countries who had suffered under literal fascism to get back to a kind of level that Britain already had because of our proud common law tradition that is one of our major exports around the world. The problem is now that the kind of complex that has built up around this court and around actually domestic judges and lawyers as well has stymied the ability of government to actually enact anything at all. So just this week we saw that an Indian paedophile will not be able to be deported because of the ECHR ruling saying that it would be unfair on his own children. These are horrible aberrations of what our old common law tradition ought to be, and it should be for Parliament and the government that is formed out of the majority in that Parliament to make these decisions, not a foreign court. I don't think it's an extreme mistake at all.
What do you make of Bill's point there, though, that Robert Jenrick has pitched his entire leadership on leaving the ECHR? Do you think that's sensible? Because, yes, it's an issue which is very, very interesting to Conservative voters. It doesn't seem to have that much appeal. Whether people like the idea or not, they're not that interested. And there is also an argument, isn't there, that leaving the ECHR actually might not help very much at all with stopping the boats because of our own British human rights laws. So was that a sensible move from Jenrick?
Yeah, well, we'll find out in half an hour or so, won't we, whether it was actually worked. I think what it showed is that his ability and his willingness to think boldly. Don't forget, Rob Jenrick is the guy who quit his job as the immigration minister in the Home Office because he thought that the rest of the government wasn't letting him do the things necessary in order to secure our borders, and that the ECHR was a part of that. I think it's a necessary but not sufficient part. As I say, a lot of the stuff, the Labour government put a lot of this into domestic law as well with the Human Rights Act in 1998, and a kind of thicket of law has grown up around this. All of that would need to be taken away as well. It's also probably true there hasn't been as much rolling the pitch, as it were, to get people ready. Something like leaving the European Union had been prepared. People have been talking about this and getting ready for it for a long time. So it would be a big distraction in some ways, but I think that it speaks to a wider problem that the government isn't really the government anymore. And Starmer and his government will be finding this, that you've got so many people in these departments who are civil servants who you can't get rid of if you're the minister, who are trying to block you. You've got lawyers coming and getting in the way of all these things all the time. That makes any actual action of any government doing anything almost impossible. Leaving the ECHR is a part of fixing all of that. And I think when Kemi and Rob both, I think the best people placed out of all the Tory candidates, because they both understand the scale of those kinds of reforms. I think Rob comes at it from a kind of lawyer's perspective. Kemi says she comes at it from an engineer's perspective. And the truth is you need both of those in order to fix the UK.
Do you know, James, banging on all the time and blaming the civil service. I was a minister for 8 years, and if you had a clear view and conviction of what you wanted to do and how you would do it, the civil service would go with you. And I think this blame culture of it's all the problem of the blob, it's all the problem of the civil servants, it's just not wrong. It doesn't cut through with the British public.
No, to come back on that, I worked in lots of departments as well, and if you do have a very clear take and you bang on about something again and again and again, you can get it through. And by the way, I think with respect, departments have grown a lot more in terms of headcount and numbers than when you were a minister. I think this makes it more difficult. It's a weakness of the Conservatives not to cut a lot of that back. And I think that there's a little bit of an ideological impulse to want Labour to succeed ahead of the Tories. I think that's the main problem. I think that it's got to a point where you've got 4 or 5 ministers and a few special advisors in, say, the Department for Education. There's about 10 overall versus 8,500 civil servants. It's very, very hard to keep a tack on this.
Okay.
But the idea that you just have to bang on and on and on and on to get one thing through, that's why nothing works in this country
But that's not the reality. It wasn't the reality of the last Labour government.
We drove a last word from Scarlett. Scarlett, Robert Jenrick talks about uniting the party, stopping the drama, so on and so on. But I'm wondering, if you go down the route of leaving the ECHR, half your party doesn't want to do that. So on what planet is pursuing that route, going to unite the party?
Yeah,
you get civil servants,
exactly.
And you've got your party to deal with first.
It doesn't seem likely that that would help uniting the party, and I would suggest that the first thing the Conservatives need to do to be able to be given a hearing again by the public is to stop all of the infighting and to stop that spilling over. So I do think then that the ECHR could be a difficult issue. I mean, I think it was clear why he chose it as a sort of issue for this leadership contest, because it was a wedge issue, that he thought he could separate himself from the crowd, and also 2 in 3 Conservative members support it. The problem is that by a 2-to-1 margin, the public don't.
Thank you very much, and we'll have lots more to come. Thank you, of course, to Peter Swallow there. After the break, we'll be speaking to former Tory MP Tom Hunt, who's backing Robert Jenrick. See you in 3 minutes.
Good morning. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office on this Saturday morning. Quite a calm weekend ahead, and with that, a fair bit of cloud around as well. That cloud will keep things mild, but it is also going to bring some spots of rain. Most places will stay often dry, but like I said, a bit of rain coming and going. Nonetheless, it should be pretty light if you do see any at all. That cloud will make it feel a bit mild at times, with temperatures actually peaking around 15 or 16 degrees Celsius, but the lack of sunshine means it's not going to feel especially warm at all. As we go through into this evening, and we stick with the largely cloudy but mild theme, which is relatively good news if you're heading to any fireworks displays. For most, it is going to stay pretty calm. Just do be aware across the north of Scotland, the winds will be strengthening here, so turning quite blustery. But further south, for many, it's going to stay pretty calm. Still the chance of some spots of rain, but they're still going to be pretty light if you do see any rain, so don't worry too much. And with the cloud, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, but again, towards the south coast of England, here it could turn a little bit breezy as well. Overnight, most places are going to stay fairly cloudy. Some breaks in the cloud, though, over East Anglia, maybe central parts of England, could allow for temperatures to dip a little bit more than elsewhere, so a slightly fresher feel. Perhaps some mist and fog patches developing, and also across eastern parts of Scotland could turn a little bit chilly here, perhaps a touch of frost. Otherwise, a mild start for many of us tomorrow morning. As we go through the day itself, again, the cloud may be thick enough for some rain, perhaps in the southwest, some outbreaks of rain moving through, also across parts of Northern Ireland, and even elsewhere, 1 or 2 spots can't be ruled out. But I think for many, it may be a slightly brighter day than today, a greater chance of seeing some sunshine, especially towards the north and east of Scotland, and temperatures once more, well, on the mild side for the time of year. Bye-bye.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Court cases.
A presidential dropout.
Assassination attempts.
This has been a US election like no other.
And if the polls are correct, it's on a knife edge.
On Tuesday night, stay up with us as the drama unfolds and America decides their next president.
We'll discuss what it means for them, for the world, and for our special relationship. America Decides, Tuesday night from 11.
Only on GB News.
And we're joined now by former Conservative MP for Ipswich and backer of Robert Jenrick, Tom Hunt. So, Tom, we were talking a little bit there about the wisdom of Jenrick pitching basically his whole campaign on leaving the ECHR. Do you think that was a wise decision?
Well, I don't think it's right to say he based his whole campaign on that. I mean, he's spoken a lot about things like housing policy, energy policy, law and order, the economy. But he has been right to focus to quite a large extent on immigration. We can't win the next general election unless we deal with this reform threat, and we can't deal with the reform threat unless we get our credibility back on immigration. Robert has made a very powerful case why, in his view, we need to leave the ECHR to be able to control our borders, and nobody, as far as I can see, has challenged the logic of the argument he's made. I think he was right to make that argument.
What do you make of Kemi Badenoch? You're not supporting her in this contest. I've heard from quite a lot of Conservative MPs that she's a little bit hot-headed, perhaps, can be a bit ratty with journalists. Do you think that's a bit of a problem?
Well, I actually backed Kemi Badenoch in 2022, and at the start of this contest, I was very torn between Rob and Kemi. I thought it needed to be one of those two, so I'm in a fortunate position because if the candidate I back doesn't win today, then my next best candidate wins. So I think actually we have two strong candidates. So in terms of Kemi's personal manner, she's always been quite pleasant and kind to me. I actually quite like her directness. I quite like the fact that she's not afraid to ruffle a few feathers. I'd rather have that than... And some people say, oh, you know, she's difficult to work with. Well, I can't imagine Margaret Thatcher would have been particularly easy to work with. There's lots of people who I think would be quite nice to work for who probably wouldn't be very good leaders. So I actually think, you know, yes, I back Rob. There's a number of reasons I back Rob, but actually I think Kemi's is a pretty strong option as well. So I think the Conservative Party's in good hands after today, whatever the outcome.
Well, that's nice to hear. Who would you like to see in the shadow cabinet either way?
Well, I mean, I think if Rob wins, I think, you know, Kemi is a hugely talented politician, incredibly unique politician. I'd like to see her have a senior role. And of course, if Kemi wins, I'd like to see Rob play a key role. And I particularly would like to see, you know, the points that Rob's made on immigration. I'd like to see a lot of that agenda enacted. But look, I mean, I'm feeling positive about today. It's been a bit awkward in a way because yes, I back Rob, but I quite like Kemi as well. But look, I'd rather be in this position than kind of have this sort of sense of foreboding about the outcome and somebody I really don't think is appropriate wins. So look, whether it's Rob, whether it's Kemi, we've got a proper Conservative as our leader, and actually I think we can take the fight to reform. I think we can win re-election with either of them.
OK, great stuff. Thank you for your company this morning, Tom. Really appreciate it. And there's, just under 20 minutes to go until we find out who the new leader of the Conservative Party is. We'll be going live to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who's on the ground in central London at that event very, very shortly. The candidates are arriving in just a few minutes, I think. But for now, stick with us. We'll be back in just a tick.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
You must be so proud of your daughter being so just amazingly brave and a model for other people who face illness.
I think we're proud of her all day, every day, and always have been. Liz has always given her all to anything she put her mind to, whether that was studying for her GCSE exams at school or whether it's been her photography and battling cancer. Liz never does anything by half, and we are so incredibly proud of her each and every day.
And Liz, I noticed a wonderful line from you saying that when you've got cancer, A-levels don't matter so much. That seems to me to be a very reasonable view to take and has given you then the chance to do these other amazing things that you will be doing more of in future with the London Ambulance Service. And I imagine many people will want to help you with your bucket list because they've now seen you and seen how brave you are.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we've already been overwhelmed by the responses and the support by so many people. I think when my mum originally posted the list, it received like 4,000 replies. It was insane, and still there's more. So from the bottom of our hearts, and especially mine, we just want to say thank you, because there's nothing that forces anyone to get in touch and say, hey, I have something you can do, you know, pop over and do this or that, or it's just out of the generosity of their hearts. So thank you.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, Ben and Olivia with you on Saturday Morning Live, a very special edition. The Tory leadership announcement is being revealed in 15 minutes. So who will be the leader of the Conservative Party? Find out, stick with us on GB News. Let's go live now to the event in central London where our political editor, Christopher Hope, is amongst it all. Chris, what's going on?
Hi, Ben, that's right. It's been a 3-month wait to get to this point. 6 candidates, now just 2 remain. Kevin Badenoch or Robert Jenrick. Both will have a challenge in uniting their parliamentary party because both are not supported by 2/3 of Tory MPs. Earlier I spoke to Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, a presenter on GB News, who will be the chairman of the Tory party if Robert Jenrick wins. Here's what he had to say.
I think the issue with unity is that it is a consequence of success, not a harbinger of success. And therefore, if any leader of the opposition is making inroads against Labour, is putting forward policies that are popular, then that leader unites the party. Boris had a very united party when he won election in 2019. So it is a consequence, not a harbinger of success.
OK, so the 2 candidates have now arrived here at this central London location. They're both in the individual green rooms. At some point in the next 10 minutes, they'll be taken to one side by Richard Fuller, the party chairman. They'll be told the result individually, and there'll be a press officer in the room to scope and write out a press release with the winner. So it's quite exciting here. It's been a long wait to get to this point. We'll hear around 11 o'clock, we'll hear from Richard Fuller, the chairman, and then from Bob Blackman, who's the person who will announce the result. He's the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Tory MPs. And about 10 past 11, we'll hear the speech from the winner. So a moment here for the party. I should say the gift given to this leader by Rishi Sunak, the outgoing leader, is a Tory lead, unbelievably a Tory lead, given the scale of that defeat back in July. The Tories are now 1 point ahead, according to polling from BMG Research, on 29 points, up 4. Labour down 2 at 2%, 28%, forgive me. Reform, very interestingly, down 3 points at 17%, and the Lib Dems down 1 at 13%. Almost everything in that poll is going in the right direction. I mentioned it to one Tory official earlier, and he joked that the first story this leader will have to deal with is blowing Rishi's poll lead. I think he was joking.
Well, no, it's a good point, Chopper. It's a good point. Thank you. We'll come back to you very shortly for the big announcement in about 12 minutes' time. Thanks, Chopper. Yeah, good point, isn't it, Olivia? It was, you know, whether you're a Labour supporter or a Reform or a Tory, by anyone's accounts, it was a pretty barnstorming final speech from Rishi Sunak in the budget, wasn't it?
Well, absolutely. I was speaking to a few Conservative MPs who were actually saying, hang on a minute, what was wrong with Rishi Sunak? Why are we losing him? And I think there is a bit of a feeling in the party that Sunak was dealt an extremely bad hand, perhaps didn't play it quite as well as he could have done. But there are those who are saying, well, maybe we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Yeah. We're joined again by our fantastic panel here, James Price, Scarlett Maguire, Bill Rammell. James, what do you think about that? Why are the Conservatives losing Rishi Sunak?
It was a whole new Rishi, wasn't it? Sort of unburdened by what has been, as Kamala Harris would say.
Stop, but it was 3 days.
It was easily the best I've ever seen him perform. Yeah, as you say, he inherited a pretty sticky wicket, and I think there were some missteps on the way through that you couldn't quite work out what it was that he really believed in. And again, Bill and I disagreed about this earlier, but I think that what is required in order to make the UK a success is a much more fundamental rewiring and reforming of how you're able to govern the United Kingdom, and I don't think that Rishi was, at the end of the day, willing to make those kinds of big structural changes. You know, there was a lot of briefing when he was in the Treasury, when he was the Chancellor, that he really liked the fact that he impressed the senior civil servants with his ability to understand numbers and spreadsheets and things like that. That's very important, but you have to be willing to upset those sorts of people to get the big kind of fundamental changes that I think are going to be necessary. And if they aren't changed, then, as they won't be under Labour, we won't see any improvement by the next election, which is why this next leader for the Conservatives, whoever it is, has got a chance to get back into power.
And Scarlett, do you think that whoever the next Tory leader is, whether it's Jenrick or Kemi, or maybe it depends on which it is, do you think they'll be more popular than Rishi Sunak, or are the Conservatives in the position that they're in at the moment because of 14 years of, a few slip-ups here and there, shall we say? Do you think they have a chance of getting back some polling momentum after Rishi?
Yeah, I think they do have a chance, but I think it could go both ways. So I think you're absolutely right. I think part of the reason why Rishi Sunak was so unpopular by the time he called his election was because he was being tarnished by the Conservative brand. It's easy to forget that Rishi Sunak was actually the most popular politician in the country with popularity ratings which are sort of unthinkable of now during the pandemic. And you might say that's just because he was giving free money out to people. Potentially that's true. But it is still quite shocking where he then ended up. I do think, though, that what they need is a new face, which actually both Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch could lay a good claim to being. We've seen that in the contest so far, the more well-known you are by the public, the less liked you are as the Conservative leadership contender. So I think it's good that they're going either way with people that aren't that well-known by the public yet, because it means they have a chance to turn around their own reputation, but also, crucially, the Conservatives.
Bill?
It's amazing when people are liberated from public office. They deliver, in some senses, their best performances. Go back to when Margaret Thatcher was defenestrated by the Tory party. She made a statement on Europe in the House of Commons. It was one of her best ever performances in the Commons. So I think when you're liberated, you, in a sense, become a different person. But I think Sunak had had enough. You know, that's why he went early in July. You know, he just couldn't unite the warring factions within the Tory party. And I think a fundamental problem the Tories face is it's not clear what the Tory party stands for in the modern world. And there are a whole host of different views within the party. And until they reconcile that, I think they're still going to be out of it.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's, I think really, do you think that it's a problem for the Conservative Party that someone like Jeremy Hunt is saying that he's going to step away, James Cleverly as well, lots of, as Bill says, opposing views within the party, and also, how are they going to find the experience to make up a good front bench?
Well, they need the numbers as well, don't they? So that's, you could, most of the front bench could be taken up, technically speaking, I believe, by members of Parliament. So they are going to struggle just from a numbers perspective, let alone on the experience one. But I do think, Zen, what I'm saying, you need a fresh start. But I think they should have some experience. And again, they should have some gestures, at least, to the fact that the party should be united.
The James Cleverly one, I find, from a Tory perspective, really disturbing. That's someone who stood for the leadership of the Tory party. So he's not, you know, in a frame of mind where he wants to step back from frontline politics, but he's not prepared to serve on the front bench.
James, what's going to happen to all these people? I'm quite interested in that as well. I mean, Jeremy Hunt has said that he's going to just hang on to his seat but doesn't want to be in the shadow cabinet. James Cleverly as well. Rishi Sunak says he's going to keep his seat. Are they really just going to sort of sit around on the back benches?
Well, I think Hunt said a couple of years in the back benches. I was privileged to work for him very briefly. He's got a lovely young family. He says he wants to spend some more time with his kids, which I think is a good fundamentally Conservative principle that he'll be enacting, which is nice. I think Cleverly as well, in a recent interview yesterday, said that he was still considering his future, maybe running for Mayor of London, all these sorts of things. So perhaps they take a back seat. I can't see Rishi Sunak sticking around for the whole Parliament necessarily. But I do think that, as Bill says, that the new leader, whichever one of these two guys it's going to be, is going to need time to set out their stall, their underlying philosophy and how that turns into things. And you need a lot of fellow travellers along there with you. And that the first few years, when people are still not really paying a huge amount of attention, will let people get to know those kind of shadow briefs. And some of the talented people in the Tory party will have a chance to rise up. Now, maybe you mix it up in a few years and Hunt and people like that come back, but you need that kind of training ground, I think.
Talking of Jeremy Hunt, he looked genuinely furious at that budget when he was sat listening to Rachel Reeves, and in an interview with GB News afterwards, you could see it on his face. He was angry.
Yeah.
Why was he so angry? Do you think he genuinely believes Labour have, you know, I'll say it, fiddled the books and broken their manifesto promises?
Yeah, he does, and I agree with him. You know, he's a man who's very successful in business. He understands what the real world is. You know, and actually, if you look at his business story, he had a couple of businesses that didn't do very well, and so he learned, he cut his teeth, and then he got very successful, and then he went and joined public life. So he understands what the real world impact of these kind of out there numbers will actually be to normal people. That's why he's so angry.
Absolutely not. The reason he was so angry was that the OBR called him out as a liar. They said, if we had been given the correct information, then our forecasts around the Conservative budget in the spring would have been materially different. That is as close as an independent body comes to calling you a liar.
Scarlett?
Right, Jeremy Hunt was so angry. I mean, I think it's a difficult one. the budget, I think, has so far actually has looked like it's not landed as badly as it could have done with the public. We've done some polling off the back of it, which shows there was an understanding that the public finances weren't in a good state, that the Conservatives played their part in that, and that some tax rises would need to go to increase, from the public's perspective, to pay for things like the NHS. So sort of broadly speaking, in the broad brush principles, there's sympathy for this idea that some of these measures are needed. I think that the difficulty will be in a year's time, if the economy isn't growing, if the NHS isn't in a better place, if public services aren't delivering, then I think you'll see opinion.
And that's the key fundamental. Labour's success is predicated on growth. Now, the figures for the next year are good. 2% growth. You know, the Tories would have given their right arm for that, but we've got to increase it in the subsequent years.
Well, Bill, the Labour picked up a very generous economic outlook. They can bang on all the time about, you know, how the mess the Tories left them. The fact of the matter is, inflation's falling down to 2%, mortgage rates were coming down, the Bank of England rate was coming down, and also growth the first 6 months of this year was about 0.7%, the best of any anywhere in Europe, and the highest rate of growth in about...
And the International Monetary Fund, based on Labour's intentions and plans, has uprated the growth forecast by 50% since we came to power.
Scarlett, I'm interested in the sort of optics of this as well. You say, and I think you're absolutely right, that in a year or so the public will judge Labour on whether it has delivered growth. How obvious will it be whether or not Labour has delivered growth? Will they be able to, you know, pull some figure out that shows that growth, and it'll be all kind of one party showing one figure, one showing another set of figures, or will it be pretty stark?
I think this is the challenge for the government, and actually was the challenge for Rishi Sunak as well. And we're seeing this all over the world. It's actually one of Kamala Harris's biggest challenges going into the US election, is that talking numbers doesn't work. So you can't say that you should be grateful because the economy is growing 0.7% or 2% or even 5% if people are feeling worse off. And so because of the sort of long tail of the sort of what it takes for economies to recover from COVID, you're seeing again in governments everywhere the incumbents getting kicked out because people are feeling worse off and they do not like being told they should be feeling better off than they are. And I think that's going to be the problem for Labour. People will need to feel quite substantially better off than they have for the last few years.
I think that's a real risk to this Labour government. If you look at America, Joe Biden's economic growth rate, by any objective criteria, is a huge success story, and yet they're level pegging in the polls. Okay. People have got to feel it, and we've got to be able to communicate that.
If anyone's just tuned in at home, we are a few minutes away from revealing the new Conservative Party leader. We'll be going live to central London, where the winner will be announced. In the meantime, literally a couple of minutes away, in the meantime, Bill, Andy Allison, who's a GBNews member, good morning, Andy, you've said that's the first sensible thing I've heard Bill Rammell say. The Tories are now just a mongrel party, no definition of who they are. They could never get the whole party on side. It's reform or nothing. Has he got a good point there? Because we saw in some, is it a council by-election yesterday or the day before, Labour are losing a few council seats to reform, and that is reform's big ambition for the next...
It's a mixed picture. So in my former constituency of Harlow, a couple of weeks ago, we had a council by-election. We won it comfortably, and reform almost pushed the Tories into third place. In other parts of the country, and that one you're quoting, Ben, was in Wolverhampton. Yes. It was colossally bad for the Labour Party. So I think it's a mixed picture, depending on where you are in the country.
Isn't that who the Labour Party need to be worried about, though, in actual fact? Not the Tories, not whoever's going to win this leadership contest today, but reform. They're targeting the council seats. Nigel Farage has come out and said, we don't care about the Conservatives. We are after Labour. Labour needs to watch their back.
We need to focus on delivering. We need to cut net migration, which the Tories allowed to spiral out of control. We need to invest in public services, and we need to deliver economic growth. If we do those three things in 3 years' time, we will be in prime position to win the next general election.
Scarlett, what do you make of the momentum behind reform? Obviously, they won 5 seats the election. Pretty impressive, given it was a brand new party. Where's that momentum going?
I think at the moment it's not moving particularly, although we have seen that one of the consistent things, again, thinking about the trends from voting intention polls in general, which we've already said are not the best metric at this point in a parliament, seen reform creeping up. Not the case in the one quoted earlier with Conservatives ahead of Labour, but in general, they're seeming to be improving their performance on the general election. I think the council elections that we've got, the local elections in the spring, will be a very good testing ground for reform. So might some of the by-elections, which we're now expecting to happen. If I was Labour, I would be very worried about reform, actually. They're second in 89 seats. I think they do hold an appeal to a certain sort of Labour voter. That sort of Labour, Leave voting, Brexit voting, Boris voting. In fact, Lee Anderson's own journey, I think, is mirrored by quite a lot of voters out there and potential voters. And one thing we heard a lot from focus groups during the election campaign was, my heart is with reform, reform, but I'm going to vote Labour because I really want to kick the Conservatives out. And I think that's a concern. And actually, I think you're absolutely right. I think part of the problem the Conservatives have, that it's not so much, they shouldn't be thinking of, OK, well, if I take this popular policies of reforms, then I can get some of their voters back. The drive to reform is reflecting voters' desperation for authenticity. Voters are feeling incredibly distrustful of politics, of politicians and of the mainstream parties, and that's what they're looking for. So, yes, absolutely, the Conservatives need to find something they believe in and then show the public that's the
James,
case.
could you ever see a scenario where Nigel and the key reform players would ever go to the Conservative Party in a couple of years? Because the argument is, the fact of the matter is, if you look at UKIP back in, was it 2014, 3 or 4 million votes, just a handful of seats, it's not really going to work under first past the post. Could you ever see the likes of Robert Jenrick opening his arms to, say, Nigel Farage?
I could definitely see the idea of a kind of Conservative reform coalition or something like that, actually, as being underweighted.
Standing down in seats.
Well, or even all those seats that Boris won in 2019, the kind of red wall seats that Labour took back again, I can see those people going off to reform, and I can see Conservatives picking up a lot more of the seats that they perhaps lost to the Lib Dems and Labour in rural seats, for example, and then you can see that kind of coalition. And reform, what is their underlying philosophy? What do they really believe? They've got 5 MPs, they're all very different people. What Lee Anderson thinks is very different from what Rupert Lowe thinks, whose, I think, speech at their conference was quoting Margaret Thatcher and the Roman historian Tacitus. Is that what Nigel Farage thinks? Do they have a kind of coherent philosophy that could kind of bind them together, enable them to make a deal with the Conservatives or anybody else?
These are... Yeah, sorry, Olivia, you go.
Oh, just to show you what you're seeing on your screens at the moment, this is everyone waiting now for the results of that Conservative leadership race, which we are expecting in now just a few minutes' time.
Yeah, did you recognise anyone on their panel, that first shot on the front bench? Can we take that first shot? Is that possible? It seems a bit of a, if I may say so, a bit of a lacklustre event. I said off air to somebody earlier how the mighty have fallen. A party in government for nearly, a decade and a half. And now they're subject to a leadership event in I don't know, it just doesn't look very flamboyant or gravitas.
This is just the structural problem that Conservatives have. They said the problem with socialism is it takes up too many evenings. If you're the kind of person who supports the Conservatives, you've probably got better things to do on a Saturday than to go into a conference like this. Maybe all the lefties are off on some kind of Palestine march or something, and normal Conservatives are just at home with their family and having a nice time.
It does feel like there are some fundamental problems with the sort of organisation of the Conservative Party as well. The new Shadow Northern Ireland secretary is saying this morning that he hasn't yet been to Northern Ireland in 4 months because the party don't have the funds to send him.
Well, I think that is a genuine problem for the Tory. But I tell you what, the big challenge to whoever wins is not to ignore the loser, as Liz trusted when she was elected.
No, well, they have said, I think both Jenrick and Badenoch have said there's positions for either of them in their shadow cabinet. I feel
like they've learnt their lesson. I think generally, I don't know if everyone would agree that this has been all a bit more light-hearted. Oh, I think we're going to get the result.
Just Bob Blackman, can we go live now to central London?
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and also welcome to everyone who is joining us online. Announce the name of the new leader of our party. Thank you to the thousands of Conservative Party members who have helped make this leadership election so engaging, and for the crucial role that our members played in putting all our candidates through their paces at events right across the United Kingdom. And a special word of thanks to all 6 candidates, to Tom, to Rob, to Priti, to Mel, to Kemi and to James, who put themselves forward and took the scrutiny of their parliamentary colleagues, the media, and most importantly, of members like you. Whoever is announced as our new leader needs our full support. We need to get back, rebuild trust with the electorate, and show that we're on the side of people who want to contribute to society and get on with their lives. We all have a role in making that happen. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our final 2 candidates for the leadership of the Conservative and Unionist Party, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick. And now I would like to introduce the returning officer, the chairman of the 1922 committee, Bob Blackman, to announce the result.
Well, thank you, Richard. And I think the whole party owes a debt of gratitude to you as party chairman since the general election. I'd also like to thank another unsung hero, Stuart Andrew, who's been our chief whip. So we suffered a devastating defeat on the 4th of July, and on the 5th of July, Rishi Sunak decided he would step down as party leader. When I was elected as chairman of the 1922 committee, I was determined that we would have an appropriate opportunity to rebuild our party, consider where we're going, and ensure that we had a broad swathe of candidates to be the leader of our party. Let's have a short campaign and get it over and done with. Others said, let's have a long campaign into next year. So we reached a compromise. And I think it's fair to say that as a result of the parliamentary process, and indeed the excellent party conference we had, we made party conference a really exciting conference for representatives to attend. So when we decided the process to whittle down the number of candidates from 6 to 4 to send to the conference, that started obviously a process and ends today. Now, members obviously have had the opportunity to vote online and by postal ballot. Some people said they wanted the debate and the opportunity for the new leader to address the budget that we knew was coming. Frankly, I wanted to make sure that Rishi got that chance to give that speech on Wednesday. And Rishi literally eviscerated that rotten budget from a rotten government that it's our duty to replace as soon as possible. So I want to record my thanks to those hard-working and energy-crossing candidates, and also, of course, the team that have made this result possible today. So, before I announce the result, let me thank the party board, the National Union, and all the party staff, in particular Victoria Carslake, who will be leaving us after this particular event, to Civica Election Services for the professionalism they've shown in dealing with the ballots, in both distributing and collecting the votes, both online and by post. I'd also like to thank my Vice Chairman, Martin Vickers, and my Treasurer, Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, my fellow officers of the 22 who enabled the parliamentary process to proceed smoothly, and indeed my parliamentary assistant, Harriet Shoesmith, who did all the work behind the scenes to make the ballots possible in Parliament. And finally, of course, I'd like to ensure we give thanks to the party members. I was determined when we started this process that our party members would have the last word on who our leader should be, and they've done so. I'd like to thank Kemi and Robert for the way they've conducted themselves during this campaign. They've both been outstanding candidates and both worthy candidates to be leader of our great party. Now, the time that you've been waiting for, the result. So I, Bob Blackman MP, Chairman of the 1922 Committee and therefore returning officer for the Conservative and Unionist Party leadership election, declare that the total number of eligible electors was 131,680. The turnout in the election was 72.8%. The total number of votes rejected was 655, of which 610 were rejected because they were either unmarked or void for uncertainty, and 45 ballot papers rejected because they'd voted for more than one candidate. Quite tough in a two-person election. Anyway, the result was Kemi Badenoch, 53,806 votes, and Robert Jenrick, 41,388. Now the important bit. Therefore, I give notice that Kemi Badenoch is elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. I welcome her to the stage, and it's great, isn't it great that we've got another female leader? And isn't it great that we're the first party to have a black leader of the party? Another glass ceiling shattered. But I welcome Kemi to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. And I want to start by thanking Richard Fuller for his work as our party chairman since July. And also Bob Blackman as returning officer for this contest. You and your teams have done us all a great service. Thank you. But I also want to pay tribute to everyone in the Conservative Party who has been involved in this. It has been an experience none of us candidates will ever forget. Thank you for hosting us in your communities, in your village halls, in your pubs, and in your homes. It is the most enormous honour to be elected to this role, to lead the party that I love, the party that has given me so much. I hope that I will be able to repay that debt. There are so many people to thank. Firstly, my family, especially my husband, Hamish. Hamish, I couldn't have done this without you. Thank you for being with me every step of the way. I also want to thank Rishi. No one could have worked harder in such difficult times. Rishi, thank you for everything you did. We all wish you and your wonderful family the very best for the future. I'd also like to pay a special tribute to Robert Jenrick, who has fought a great campaign. Rob, we have all been impressed by your energy and your determination. You and I know that we don't actually disagree on very much. And I have no doubt that you have a key role to play in our party for many years to come. Thank you. I'd also like to thank all the other candidates, Priti, Mel, Tom and James, for your kind words and your many insights. We have come through this campaign more united, and the party needs you now more than ever. The task that stands before us is tough, but simple. Our first responsibility as His Majesty's loyal opposition is to hold this Labour government to account. Our second is no less important. It is to prepare over the course of the next few years for government, to ensure that by the time of the next election, we have not just a clear set of Conservative pledges that appeal to the British people, but a clear plan for how to implement them. A clear plan to change this country by changing the way that government works. The Prime Minister is discovering all too late the perils of not having such a plan. That huge job begins today. It will seek to involve all of our colleagues in Parliament, in the Scottish Parliament, the Senate, our friends in Northern Ireland, as well as councillors and party members. But this is not just about the Conservative Party. It is about the people we want to bring back to the Conservative Party. It is about the people we need to bring into the Conservative Party. It is about what the Conservative Party needs to be over the next 5, 10 and 20 years. Our party is critical to the success of our country. But to be heard, we have to be honest. Honest about the fact that we made mistakes. Honest about the fact that we let standards slip. The time has come to tell the truth. The time has come to tell the truth, to stand up for our principles, to plan for our future, to reset our politics and our thinking, and to give our party the new start that they deserve. It is time to get down to business. It is time to renew. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
And there we have it. Kemi Badenoch is the new leader of the Conservative Party, beating Robert Jenrick by how many votes was that, Olivia?
It was she got 53,000 and something to his 41,000. So she won, thanks to Bill Rammel's quick maths, with 56% of the vote. Just to put that in a bit of context for our viewers, Liz Truss won with 81,000 votes, so nearly 30,000 more than Kemi Badenoch there. And of course, Boris Johnson won with a huge 66% of the vote back in 2019. So she doesn't have a kind of enormous platform to build from, but maybe that doesn't matter quite so much in a party which isn't so riven with disagreements as previous iterations of the Tory party?
She won by about a similar margin with Liz Truss, as Liz Truss did, but I would be worried. I'd be a little bit concerned if I was the Conservative Party by just how low the turnout was. So it looks like the turnout was only just over 70%. That's substantially lower than it was in 2022 and in 2019, where it was much higher. And that suggests a sort of lack in enthusiasm, even on behalf of the own members, for who's going to lead the party, which I don't think is a great place to be in.
Well, absolutely. I mean, 87% turnout in 2019, 82% in 2022. That is down a lot.
We'll head to Chopper in just 2 seconds. But, James, first of all, forgive me for being the person to bring this up. The first thing Bob Blackman, the chair of the 1922 committee, says is we've got our first female leader and our first black leader. Why does that matter?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's good from a representation perspective. It's good from the fact that the Labour Party has not managed to do any of these things, and the Labour Party are the people who tend to bang on about this stuff a lot more. I really liked what Rishi Sunak said in the final PMQs he had. We said he was proud of being the first Asian Prime Minister, but he was also more proud that it wasn't as much of a big deal as it could have been. OK, let's go live to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who's on the ground in central London. Chopper, your reaction, please, to that result.
Yeah, Ben, history is being made here by the Conservative Party. The party now has its fourth female leader, and it's the first ever black leader of a mainstream political party. I think in the Western world, certainly in the UK. A real moment here. Kemi Badenoch, of course, the new leader of the Tory party. She is 44 years old, which means she's nearly 2 decades younger than the Labour leader. It means age will be a factor at the next election. A young, fresh Tory leader to take on a Labour leader there who will be near his pension age. That's interesting. I think she said there in her speech how she wants to start the renewal process for this party. She won. It was the closest Tory leadership election ever. 131,000 votes cast, 57% in favour of Kemi Badenoch, 43% in favour of Robert Jenrick. She wants to give Robert Jenrick a key role in her team going forward. That will be important, I think, to unite this party. She wants to hold the Labour government to account and prepare for government. She's clear that this new leader, Kemi Badenoch, can overturn a 171-seat majority Labour won in the July election. She's bequeathed by Rishi Sunak a lead for the Tory party, up 4 points to 29 points over Labour on 28 points, and Reform falling 3. That's before they even know who the party leader is. So we'll see whether there's a bump in those polls going upwards. The hard work, though, starts now for this new leader. She wants to talk about renewal. Renewal 2030 was her idea, trying to bring the party together on principles. We'll see shortly how that plays out. But a real moment here in our political life, a black female leader of the oldest political party, one of the oldest parties in the world, in the Tory party. A real moment here. Last week we saw the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Tories have now got the first black woman leader. A real moment.
Okay, Christopher Hope, thank you for that. Bill Rammell, are you sort of, celebratory that the Conservatives have got their first black leader? Does it matter? I don't understand why it matters so much. I thought the Conservatives were trying to get away from this kind of identity politics, kind of, I'd say, wokeism. Who cares? Just do the job, do it well.
They need the right leader. I mean, first of all, congratulations to her. She's won. She's won clearly. It is, in fact, a lot closer than pundits and polls had been predicting. And I think, as Scarlett said, the turnout is a real concern. 3 in 10 Tory party members didn't feel enthused to vote for any of them, and I think that is a real challenge.
Which, given that sort of the only point of being a Tory party member is that you can vote for a leader.
And absolutely. But also, I can't recall any leader of any party being elected with such a narrow base of support within the parliamentary party. She had a third of MPs saying this is the person we want to be our leader. She gave an incredibly short speech when she won. Put that alongside the fact that she's been trying to avoid media appearances, and I get no sense that this is somebody who's going to shake the Tory party up and bring it back to the prospect of winning.
I think that's a really interesting point, Scarlett, about just how divided the parliamentary party was. It was literally pretty much a third for Cleverly, Jenrick and Badenoch. Do you think that's going to matter when she's forming her shadow cabinet and going forwards?
I do think that matters, and I think it matters even more when the party is so small, because it means you can afford even less to alienate more of your MPs. And actually, it's a similar position that Liz Truss was in. So Liz Truss obviously had a slightly bigger mandate on a bigger turnout from party members, but faced similarly with a parliamentary party that was not convinced that she was the best person to lead them, and we saw that led to quite a few of its difficulties.
Yeah.
James, Kemi has been infamously light on policy in this race. What's she got to do now? I mean, the priority is stopping the boats, or at least coming up with a plan to stop the boats. She doesn't want to leave the ECHR to do that, so how will she do it?
Yeah, well, Bill said, first of all, massive congratulations to her and the team, and these things are horrendous. I've been involved in several leadership campaigns. Blue on blue is never fun. And he said, I think the first challenge for her is going to be, as we say here, to get the party together. It was only a few weeks ago, I think Boris Johnson sat exactly where I'm sitting now, talking about one of the big problems he had was not keeping that parliamentary party together. So to try and win everybody around again on a kind of united vision will be challenge number one. And as she said in that speech, her plan was to take a bit more time to try and work through some of these things. Jenrick went through very quickly with his diagnosis of problems and to try and rattle through what he wanted to try and do to fix things. Kemi's going to take a bit longer, but she's going to have to bring first her party, my party, and then the rest of the country along with that. I think the irony might be that she ends up coming to some of the same conclusions that Rob Jenrick has come to in this contest already.
I think it's a really interesting question as well. What does she do with Robert Jenrick? She said that he'll have a big part for many years to come in the Conservative Party. She said she'll offer him a job in her shadow cabinet. I expect he will want to be Shadow Home Secretary. Do you think he'll get that role?
It's always the tricky one, this, isn't it? It's a bit like a transfer deadline day for football fans, working out who's going to go where or something like that. I think that would be a natural fit, but you may want to move him to something else and have him sort of go and speak on a different issue, go develop a different policy area, so as to not mess it around. Some of those biggest jobs are the ones that will be reserved for some of her biggest supporters. And look, she's got some really talented people. They're not household names yet, but there's a guy called Alex Berghardt, who's an MP, one of the smartest, most talented people I've ever worked with, right? He gets a big job. That's going to be great. And people like that in there as well. And then she's going to have to pick some of Rob's team as well. There are some super talented people copying him. We've got to try and meld the party back together again.
James, you might know the answer to this because you're still heavily involved in the party. What role does Michael Gove play with Kemi Badenoch? Is he still in the wings, in the shadows? He's, of course, now the editor of The Spectator. He wrote an article a week or two ago saying that I'm not endorsing either candidate, but Kemi is best equipped to deal with Starmer in the Commons, at least. Is he still lurking around?
I think it's a testament to how effective a minister he was in so many different departments that he still casts such a long shadow over things. We're not talking about Liz Truss's influence or Rishi's or even Boris's over this. We're talking about Gove's, as you say, the editor of The Spectator now. I think the first couple of pieces he wrote, I think again it was a review of Boris's book. It's one of the funniest pieces of writing I've read in a long time. Look, we need people like Gove who's done that work of opposition, of actually sitting down and thinking through how you improve things. He did that at education so well. I would just have to add, by the way, all those amazing reforms that have made the UK one of the best places in the world for education are being unpicked by the new Labour government, and that's one of the things that Kemi and her team are going to have to fight against.
I would actually acknowledge that Michael Gove was probably the most successful reforming cabinet minister in 14 years of Tory government, but he's also a very divisive figure within the Tory party. In terms of where she puts Jenrick, I don't think she'll put him into Home Affairs. He's got such entrenched radical views that she's already disowned effectively. I think to give him the Home Office as his bullpit would be a mistake, and I think she's probably not going to make that mistake.
I think, Scarlett, I mean, the problem with having such a low turnout, having such a fractured parliamentary party, not really having a very big base of support, do you think that means that, you know, there'll be MPs who get offered jobs and they just say, no, thanks, I don't want to do that?
I think there could be a risk, especially if if they're not all very enthusiastic about the fact that she's become leader. They might decide it's not worth their trouble. I think that would probably be ill-advised. I think if you're advising the Conservative Party now and the MPs in it, you'd say you all need to get stuck in and do everything you can to get this ship back working again, because otherwise it's definitely doomed.
Just breaking in the last few minutes is a statement from one Boris Johnson on the results of the leadership contest. He says on Twitter, "Congratulations to Kemi on her outstanding victory. She brings a much-needed zing and zap to the Conservative Party. This sleaze-ridden Labour government has no ideas or agenda beyond the old tax and spend socialism.
Talking about sleaze.
They are far more vulnerable than the parliamentary maths might suggest. Kemi has exactly the right courage and clarity to expose Starmer's failings. She is now ideally placed to flip them over and take the Tories to victory at the next election. I will be giving her my full support and call on all Conservatives to do the same." Bill Rammell.
Well, I just said, Boris talking about sleaze in politics for someone who was convicted by Parliament of lying to Parliament, it just beggars belief. But look, it's...
Well, hang on, Bill. You could argue Keir Starmer's lied to Parliament about many things in his first 100 or so days.
Like what?
Well, he spent months trying to accuse Rishi Sunak of wanting to scrap the winter fuel allowance, and the first thing he does when he gets into power is scrap the winter fuel allowance.
I don't think... If you look at our manifesto, for the first time in 5 general elections, we didn't make a commitment to preserve the winter fuel allowance. The idea...
£40 billion worth of tax rises, that wasn't talked about in the pre-election.
And we were repeatedly challenged by the Tories, are you going to put employers' national insurance up? And we repeatedly refused to give that commitment. I was debating with Kwasi Kwarteng on Budget Day in this studio, and he acknowledged whoever won the general election was going to put up taxes. And I think there needs to be some candour and honesty in this debate.
You were shaking your head about that.
I'm not. You wouldn't be surprised that I disagree with a lot of that. Let's just on the tiny bit of this national insurance point. Who pays taxes? Right? It's not a business. A business is a legal fiction, right? It's a bit of paper. Who will pay taxes on businesses? It's either going to be the customers in the form of higher prices. It's either going to be, frankly, taxpayers because you're not going to get as much tax revenue out of them, or it's going to be the people that work for that business. And the people that work for businesses who are seeing the national insurance tax hike from Labour will be suffering that in the form of lower wages, less opportunity for them to develop themselves and less money to develop their own skills and things like that. It's going to hurt working people.
Lies in politics is nothing new. I'm sure there's plenty of them. However, this endorsement from Boris Johnson, if you can call it that, an endorsement, how pivotal is that? Would he have done that if it was Kemi or Rob who had won?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. I think that, as Scarlett says, everyone's going to at least pay lip service to start with to this idea of us all having to be one big happy family again. The challenge is on the new leader to make that a reality, and that has to be done by listening to people and by taking on board all their concerns and then setting out this kind of philosophy. She's talked a really good game, Kemi Badenoch, about the need to take this stuff slowly and start from first principles. Maybe they'll have a kind of a book club and they'll all start reading Thomas Hobbes and Edmund Burke and going through from there. That might take a bit longer, but we need to get everyone on the same page.
Do you think that's necessarily true, Scarlett, that they do need an underlying philosophy, or could they play out of the Labour playbook and win the next election by not being Labour?
I think the problem is if they were to do that, then I think it would be other smaller parties that would benefit. I think that's part of the reason why voters have been turning away from the main parties, is because they don't think they necessarily believe in things, or all the things they're saying they believe in as well, which is a sort of slightly different matter. No, I think the problem is that the Conservative parties, they've got different things they need to do all at the same time, and it's going to be hard work. So they need to work out what they believe in. They need to have some policies attached to that. They also need to be able to keep getting attention, to keep breaking through in the press cycles, and they need to try and sort of repair their brand in terms of competence and being able to deliver. Those things are all really hard to do at the same time, but they're going to have to try and find out a way to do it.
I actually think Boris's statement was calculating, because I don't think either Kemi or Robert Jenrick is the next Conservative Prime Minister. I think Boris still thinks he can be that person with a comeback, and therefore it was in his interest to endorse her now.
Do you think? I think he's making too much money on the sidelines and having fun, you know, writing books.
I wouldn't want to be Prime Minister Boris.
I think he's still ambitious and he wants to come back.
Would you agree if Boris did come back and say, hypothetically, Labour carried on in the same fashion as their first couple of months, you know, low in the polls, struggling, the goodwill is draining week by week? Do you think Boris would have a decent crack at toppling this Labour government if he did come back?
No, I mean, look, he was a once powerful, potent political force. That went with Partygate and so many other things that he did in government. And you look at the polling evidence and he's got one of the highest negative ratings there is. So I don't think he can come back, but I think he and many of his fellow travellers do believe he should come back.
Can I ask you, I disagree with Bill when he talks about Partygate. I don't think really anyone cares that much about Partygate, not least Tory members. They think he was, you know, absolutely stitched up. Is there any polling to suggest what the public think about Partygate and Boris's final sort of couple of weeks?
You can look at it in different ways. I think the polling was very clear at the time that he had to go. His popularity ratings were only going in one way. The government's ratings were only going in one way. And we've seen that's very difficult for politicians to turn around, which Keir Starmer, I'm sure, will be very worried about at the moment, sort of on that point. But no, I think I slightly disagree. I think Partygate was incredibly important, not just for damaging trust in Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party, but in politics in general. Absolutely. I have not sat through a single focus group where someone doesn't bring it up.
OK. I'm happy to be proved wrong. Christopher Hope is on the ground still in central London. We'll be going to him as soon as we can for some more reaction. James Price, just after being elected leader today, what's Kemi's immediate plans today, tomorrow, the next couple of weeks? What do you think her schedule will look like? What's her priorities?
I think the first thing she'll do is hopefully go into the Conservative headquarters and maybe a skeleton crew, but hopefully they'll all be in there ready to kind of greet her. She'll know most of those people already, but just to kind of get to know them. Those people have a new boss in her, and then she'll be putting together that shadow cabinet team.
What's she like then, James? Because there's whispers, as Olivia's alluded to throughout the show in the last couple of weeks, that she's, you know, fairly difficult to get on with, a bit spicy. What is she like? Is she a bully, as some people have gone as far to suggest?
No, I think that's way too far. I don't know her really very well. I know a lot of her top team, and they're all very impressive people. And if anyone can do it, it's some people in her team. There's a guy called James Roberts, with whom I used to work, who knows the Conservative Parliamentary Party better than anybody else. A guy called Lee Rowley, who used to be an MP, who's her Chief of Staff, is one of the smartest, best people, I think, going. So she's got great people around her like that. I think there is a level of directness that some people are not used to, but this happens a lot. Priti Patel was accused of this. Dominic Raab was accused of this. And I think the problem, and again, Bill and I will disagree about this, is that it's so frustrating these days to run one of these government departments, to ask for something to happen, to find that you're being essentially lied to. I was lied to at various points by civil servants who would flat out tell me something that wasn't actually happening, or things like that. And that's incredibly frustrating. You know, imagine it. If you're made in charge of a business, you're only allowed to hire or fire 3 or 4 people in that business. Those are your special advisors. You don't have any control over the budget. You don't have any control over the restructuring, all these kinds of problems, that would be frustrating for even the most saintly person. So let's hope that she, as I think it was Tom Hunt said earlier on, I'm not sure that Margaret Thatcher was necessarily the most sweetness and light all the way through, and she saved Britain.
Margaret Thatcher took the civil service with her, and that's what you need to do.
We're just going to throw now to our political editor, Chris Hope, who is live on the ground with Helen Whately.
Thanks, Liv. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, joining me now is Helen Whately, one of the key supporters of Kemi Badenoch, the new Tory leader. How are you? You were delighted with the result, I'm sure.
I'm, of course, pleased with the result. It was looking good for Kemi through the campaign, but you never know what the outcome is actually going to be till the moment that it's read out. So I'm delighted to see Kemi as the new leader of our party.
It's quite a narrow win, 57% to 43%, and of course 2/3 of your MPs, your colleagues in the party, didn't support her at all. How can she unite the party?
Well, something I think is positive is both Kemi and Rob Jenrick were strong candidates. And I spoke to members who are really weighing up which they should vote for. So that's a good thing that we gave members that positive choice. Obviously, there are some members who would have liked a different candidate, and that's reflected in the turnout that we see. But the fact is now we need to unite around Kemi. I'm confident that Kemi can do that. She appeals to people on the right and on the left of the party. You've seen that with the MPs who are backing her, with the former MPs who are backing her. So now we need to come together and support her to be a leader.
And what job has she promised you in the shadow cabinet?
No promises made at all.
said with a smile there for listeners on the radio to GBNews today. A big moment now, I think, the first black female leader of the Tory party, obviously, and maybe of any major political party in the world.
Well, you say that, though it's a conundrum with Kemi, of course, that she doesn't like doing identity politics. It's not about the fact that she's a woman or about the colour of her skin. I've backed her and colleagues have backed her because of how she goes about politics, because of her values, because of the way she communicates things, because she's straight with us and she thinks hard about the problems we face. That's what matters.
It's not just me saying, it's Bob Blackman saying it, the chairman of the 22 committee. He says she has punched through the glass ceiling, the fourth female leader of your party, which is quite extraordinary.
I mean, it's something that I'm proud of as a party, that we select people based on what they can do for the party and for the country, primarily. We see Labour has had much greater challenges with that. Of course, now they do have a female chancellor. They've not even managed to have a female party leader yet. So maybe they could look at us and follow our example.
She's won this role without really having any major policies, principles, not policies. Is that a worry for people, or will we hear more in future about what the actual ideas are, and when will we first start hearing those policies?
I think we need to take time on what the policy offer is that we have to the country. If I know anything from the last Parliament, what happens close to an election? Well, so much happens during a 5-year Parliament. You know, back in 2019 when Boris was elected and we were about to have the great 2020s, and then we had the pandemic and Ukraine, and so much change. Actually, now is a time for us to take stock and really think hard about what will be the right thing to offer the country in 2029 through into the 2030s.
You're doing pretty well so far, with the Tories now ahead in the polls, 4 points up, 29 points against Labour, 28 points. Isn't her first challenge not to blow the poll lead given to her by Rishi Sunak?
Well, I think that there is a job right now, quite apart from building up our policies for the future, in holding the government to account. Yeah. And as we've just seen in the budget, I mean, I was shocked by Labour's budget, by what they've done, by the way they've let down the country, by the way they essentially misled voters as to what they were going to do in the run-up to the election, and that 40 billion tax rises. I think it's extraordinary, and we will be holding them to account on that.
Okay. Well, Helen Whately there, thank you. And Helen Whately there, one of many Tory MPs, delighted, I think, with this new leader, Kemi Badenoch.
Chopper, thank you very much. Yeah, interesting, Scarlett. Christopher Hope there was saying, you know, the first black leader, the first black female leader in so many years, or at least in the Western world. And then Helen Whately saying, well, actually, Kemi doesn't really care about that identity politics kind of stuff. But I seem to remember she had a spat with David Tennant, where she called David Tennant, Kemi Badenoch, a middle-class white guy or something akin to that. So, I mean, does she care about DEI, wokeness, identity politics or not?
She might care about it. I think that either way, I think her appeal would be that she would be straight talking on it, so not leaning into it, I would say. I think you do hear, something we hear from focus groups is that straight talkingness, which again, we can be a downside, especially sort of personally, if she might rub people up the wrong way. I think it's definitely the reason why out of all the candidates, she has potentially the most upside with the electorate, even if she also might have the most downside, is this idea that she's prepared to not go along with some of those things and to talk and to say the things that she actually thinks. That's something we've heard in focus groups from polling in general. The problem is that can work both ways.
I think just to push into context there, that David Tennant spat. David Tennant said, and actually Keir Starmer has just distanced himself from these comments, that he would like to live in a world where Kemi Badenoch doesn't exist anymore.
And told her to shut up.
And told her to shut up. So that was
phenomenally rude.
Phenomenally rude, exactly. So that was a response from Kemi Badenoch to that comment. I think what will be really, really interesting is who Kemi Badenoch picks as her chief whip, because this is a very difficult party to govern, fractured in so many ways, fractured parliamentary party, small turnout, not that many members. Do you have any idea, perhaps, James, as someone close to the party, who that might be?
I mean, it's an unenviable job, isn't it, to do that? I think chief whip's an important one, but I think the tone will be set. Actually, what Jacob Rees-Mogg said earlier on is by success. If she is successful, then people will get behind her. They'll realise they'll put aside some of the concerns that some people will have, and they'll go with it. And exactly, as Guy says, I think she's got the most potential upside, as well as you mentioned, Ben, some of the negatives in there. So depending, I think, probably more on who she picks as her shadow chancellor, who she picks as shadow energy and things like that, those kinds of decisions that will help her formulate policies that will not only appeal to voters, win them back again, and actually to come up with the right answers. I think that all this stuff about moving to the centre ground or whatever this stuff, you want the things that are actually going to work. And if you look at energy policy, for example, it's going to be a total mess by the time the next election comes around. Education, again, it's been so good for so long, it's getting weak again. I think those are the more important roles, and then people will just get behind it because the party is too small in Parliament. It's only 120 people. You know, if you're going to be a grumpy about things from the get-go, you're just not going to be seen as a team player, and I think that's bad for everybody and for the country.
Well, we don't really know what sort of Badenockism looks like yet. As we've talked about through this show, she has been pretty tight-lipped about what her policies would be. Of course, perhaps the most important thing right now is what the Conservatives would like to see for the economy. Do we have any inkling of what sort of Shadow Chancellor, perhaps we don't know the person, but what sort of Shadow Chancellor Kemi Badenoch's going to go for? Scarlett?
We don't know. We have heard some of the noises that she's been making when pushed on things like the NHS and the need for reform within it, and some of her scepticism of a larger state. So you could see a Chancellor that reflects that. I think it will certainly be her most interesting appointment, because especially at a time where there's so much scrutiny on what Labour's doing with the economy in the wake of the budget, and also just because of the sort of situation that we're in, I think having the right Shadow Chancellor in place is absolutely crucial for them.
You make the point, Scarlett, that actually a large proportion of people you've spoken to in focus groups are fine with the budget. They're OK with taxes rising. Do you think that Kemi Badenoch will pick up on that? Is it essentially the end of the Conservatives as a low-tax party?
It's something they need.
God, no.
Well, it's something they need to think about. I mean, they weren't a low-tax party when they were in government, which I think is also part of the reason why both parties are now operating in this. That they're sort of using the political language and the tone that the Conservative Party set over 14 years, and it's something where the public, the public generally speaking in England, in Britain, have been pro-tax and pro-spend. I think the thing is that you're seeing that start to change a bit when people become hard up, which they have been feeling over the last few years. They can be less reluctant to see their own taxes rise to pay for these things. OK,
let's go to Christopher Hope, who's on the ground in central London at the leadership announcement. Chris, who have you got?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, joining me now is Nigel Huddleston, who is also a supporter of Kemi Badenoch. Nigel Huddleston, isn't she going to be a headline writer's dream, given how she often causes difficulties with her comments?
Well, I think she's refreshingly honest with the way she expresses herself, and I think that's one of the endearing characteristics, actually, of her, and one of the reasons why she won. I've worked with her really closely. I worked with her at the Department of Business and Trade. I was one of her junior ministers, so I've seen another side of Kemi. The heads down, minutiae detail, really hard-working, really strong work ethic as well. So there's different sides to Kemi, but, she's a personality, and I think we need that in politics.
Some say she's a bully to staff members, to colleagues. You ever saw that?
No, never. In fact, quite the opposite, actually. I've never worked with anybody who's so gracious. She's very clear in what she expects from you when you work with her. But if you do well, she'll praise you, and if you mess up, that's your responsibility. To be honest, she's a really, really clear and effective manager of people, and she knows how to motivate a team. And it's one of the reasons why, if you look at the people supporting her, nearly every single minister who ever worked for Kemi backed her during this leadership campaign. So I think that speaks volumes about her ability to manage people.
She's quite a blank slate, isn't it? I mean, she's pro-principles but not policies. Is that a worry for Tories, or is that something which might unite the party because there's nothing to divide about?
I think the key thing there is, her whole campaign was Renewal 2030. It was based on principles and policies and values, and therefore over time we'll develop the minutiae detail of that, because of course we do need to fight the next general election, but we're in opposition now. So the key thing is we've got to use our time in opposition wisely and develop those policies so that we can make sure that we not only hold this government to account, but as Kemi said, that we position ourselves to make sure that we are a government in waiting. But we've got a few years for that.
And just finally, prepare for government, is that realistic?
Yes, it is, absolutely. I think we've seen with the budget this week that this lot are not capable of governing, and therefore we need to make sure that we get them out as soon as possible, and that is an awesome responsibility we have.
Nigel Huddleston there with his analysis of Kemi Badenoch, saying that she can unite this party. Back to you.
Thank you, Christopher. If you're just tuning in to GB News this morning, we have the results of the Tory leadership contest. Kemi Badenoch is the new leader of the party. She's beaten Robert Jenrick. She got 56% of the votes to Robert Jenrick's 44%. The turnout was, what, 72%, Olivia?
Just over 72%.
Pretty on the low side?
Very on the low side. It was around 87 in 2019, about 82 for Liz Truss. And there were also more members in 2019 and 2022. So Kemi Badenoch has won with 30,000 fewer votes than Liz Truss.
Well, the task now is uniting the party. Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson, of course, has released a statement in the last couple of minutes. He says, congratulations to Kemi on her outstanding victory. She brings a much-needed zing and zap to the Conservative Party. This sleaze-ridden Labour government has no ideas or agenda beyond the old tax and spend socialism. They are far more vulnerable than the parliamentary maths might suggest. Kemi has exactly the right courage and clarity to expose Starmer's failings. She's now ideally placed to flip them over and take the Tories to victory at the next election. I'll be giving her my full support and call on all Conservatives to do the same.
Bill, I'm fascinated by this idea that Labour is more vulnerable than the parliamentary arithmetic would suggest. Do you buy into that at all?
Look, I'm never complacent, but I think it was a very decisive result. Not necessarily in terms of Labour's vote share at the last general election, but a determination to turn people's backs on the Tory party. And I think if we start delivering, as I believe we will, I think you can very easily see Labour getting back up to 35-36% of the vote, which historically isn't a huge total, but with the Tories split with Reform, I think that's a winning position. But I'll tell you what, I think the other interesting observation about Badenoch is her whole experience as a parliamentarian has been in government. It's very, very different in opposition when you struggle for airtime. And look at her track record through this leadership election. She hasn't wanted to do interviews. She's avoided the limelight. So I think that's the challenge. I also think, and I'm still fundamentally puzzled by this, the timing of the outcome of this leadership election from the Tory party's perspective is astonishing. So the new leader didn't get the chance to respond to the budget, and in 3 days' time, with the US election, the Tories are going to be blown away from the airways. So it's ham-fisted, to say the very least.
I do think that's a really interesting point. I mean, with my other hat on as political correspondent, it sometimes feels to me as though Labour hasn't really noticed that it's in power. Some of their media interviews seem a little bit slapdash. Meanwhile, the Conservatives don't really seem to understand that they're in opposition. They think that everyone's still really, really interested in what they've got to say. And I think that could be a bit of a problem for Kemi Badenoch. She is not known to have a personality of sort of buttering people up. And maybe that's a good thing. Difficult women do well, etc. But when there isn't very much media interest in a party, is there an argument that she should be a bit better at making friends?
Well, her whole pitch to the membership was, we're not fighting a general election right now. It's going to be years away. The world is going to look very, very different. We don't know what's going to be happening in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in America, in Europe, in our own economy, in the way that technology changes. All these things are going to be very different. And that her pitch was to go on fundamental kind of conservative values. And actually, we know quite a lot of what she thinks in terms of the philosophers that she reads. She's a big fan of Roger Scruton, of Thomas Sowell in America. And she talked about on longer form podcasts as well about a lot of these ideas. It's that kind of Trump J.D. Vance playbook of going on all these long form podcasts to get out to voters you don't normally get. So we know some of their thinking there. And actually, her whole point is, now I'm going to take some time quietly and actually sit calmly and work through what's actually necessary, what's actually going to work. Let Labour carry on shooting themselves in the foot. It's bad for the country, but there's nothing the Tories can do about that right now. And then in a few years, come out and go, right, we've actually worked it all through and we have the plan that is going to save this country from the mess that it's in.
Let's remind ourselves of the moment Kemi Badenoch was announced as the new Conservative leader. Oh, it's the turnout, actually. Let's have a look.
Almost 73%, and a lot of people are saying, oh, the turnout's going to be lower. The most important thing is a 73% turnout, of course, is 12% above the general election turnout. So our members have turned out and voted. That's good news. The Kemi now has to bring everyone together. There'll be party members out there that maybe chose not to vote. There may be people that forgot to vote. But there's all sorts of reasons why people didn't vote. The most important thing is we've tried to ensure that everyone that wanted to vote could actually cast their vote. Now we've got to bring the party together, as I say, bring all wings of the party together, united as one team to get rid of this rotten Labour government as fast as possible, and for us to reconnect with the British people, build that trust. And I hope that Kemi's going to assemble a shadow cabinet of all the talents across the party so it can be truly representative of the Conservative voice collectively.
I do find it a little bit absurd that he's comparing the result there to the general election turnout. Of course, a very different set of circumstances. The only reason, as I was saying, that you would be a Conservative Party member, the only real perk you get is choosing the leader. So the fact that a quarter of members didn't vote, I think probably is quite alarming there. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good bit of spin. It's the best effort, isn't it? The Conservative Party is, as you would imagine, from a big defeat like that, not in a great shape right now. A lot of members are a lot older and won't even be around necessarily at the next election, which is a horrible thing to think about, but it shows that we need to be appealing all the way down the age spectrum and the age at which people voted Conservative. In 2015, your crossover age was like 39 years old. Now it's sort of like 70 years old at the last election, and that's not obviously sustainable in any way. The party's got to modernise in lots of ways. We know the Labour Party has always been, for a long time, better at having more members and things like that. In the 1950s, the Tory Party had over 3 million members. Right? If we can get some anywhere like that again, that would bode very, very well for the party, and that's one of the first challenges that Kemi will have.
Scarlett, sorry, David, obviously.
Well, something I'm quite interested in as well is the no confidence threshold among Conservative MPs, because traditionally, if 15% of the Conservative Parliamentary Party write a letter of no confidence into the leader, then that triggers a no confidence election, and that no confidence election could end up with a new leader. In these circumstances, I mean, surely they can't keep that rule in place. There's 122 MPs. It would take, what, my math isn't that good, but 17, 18 MPs to say they have no confidence for that to end. Is that going to be a problem?
Yeah, I think that would be quite a silly position to be in. And actually, I think that sort of goes to a larger point, which is what I would be worried about from that turnout is actually what it means for the fight they're able to put on at the locals. And I do think in some ways there might be moments of danger that Badenoch creates for herself. But the most obvious one in terms of the calendar, when you look at it, is what happens to the Conservative Party at the locals, or particularly what happens relative to the Reform Party. And I think there is a real danger if they have this membership that's not very enthusiastic, if they've lost a lot of their councillors already, which they have done, if their MPs have been whittled right down, they're not going to be able to put on a good fight. And then if they have a bad result, we've seen how lethal that can be in terms of MPs getting antsy and wanting to change leader.
Absolutely.
I think it's very likely that Kemi Badenoch won't fight the next general election because that no confidence threshold is so low.
Who will then?
Who knows? Who knows? I'll tell you this, one other point that I think is worth making. I think it's about time that both major parties stopped giving party members the right to select the leader.
Oh, Bill.
Party memberships are not representative of the election, and any system that gives you Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, I think has got to have something not going for it.
I mean, I know Labour aren't, all in with listening to the electorate and telling cheeky fibs.
The membership aren't the electorate. Well, they're not representative of views.
You could argue they're the most invested, the most clued up. I mean, they pay to be members. They're the most involved in politics. Would you rather those kind of people picking the potential next Prime Minister of the country, or just kind of half-baked everyday Joes who kind of keep one eye on the news or politics?
No. I'd leave it to members of Parliament. We have had people elected in both the Tory party and the Labour party as leaders that don't carry the confidence of their parliamentary colleagues.
But the electorate elects those MPs. They vote for them, and then as soon as they get into Parliament, they ignore everything they voted them in for. You've got Lib Dems in disguise in the Conservative Party following One Nation policies, and yet they were voted in by the electorate, who arguably want right of centre politics.
I tell you what, every MP of all parties actually does listen to their electorate and wants to be in touch with them. And I think they'd be much better judges about who leads the party rather than party members who are not representative of the country.
The answer for the Conservative Party, of course, is to try and get more members, right? Is to not be satisfied with that and to say, look, we're a party that's going to appeal to the whole country. It's going to be great to be a member of this party and come to all our fun drinks receptions and meet MPs and things like that. Okay. That's really who I'm
Charlotte, you've got 10 seconds.
I don't want to go to fun drinks receptions and meet MPs. And I think that's where we can all agree. So thank you so much to our panel.
Thank you.
And thank you guys at home for joining us today on Saturday morning. But don't go anywhere. Dawn Neeson is up next. So we'll hope to see you at the same time next week.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Most of us do have a calm weekend ahead of us, and that is because high pressure is sat across the UK, bringing light winds for most of us. But where those isobars are a little bit closer together across the southwest, but particularly in the northwest as well, we could see a little stronger of a breeze, gusts of around 30 to 35 miles an hour along some northern coastal areas of Scotland. With high pressure, though, it means that it's going to be largely dry. A few spots of drizzle around, but there certainly is plenty of cloud right across the UK, bringing relatively grey skies. Temperatures underneath all of that are actually a couple of degrees above where we'd expect them to be for the time of year, generally ranging between 13 and 15 degrees Celsius. If you do have any bonfire night celebrations planned for this evening, then most of us are looking to stay relatively dry. Can't rule out the odd spot of drizzle, again, particularly around some higher ground sites just to watch out for, and certainly the skies are going to be very cloudy right throughout the evening for many of us. A bit misty and murky, again, particularly over the tops of the hills, but we might start to see a few clearer spells developing across northeastern areas of Scotland, and these part of the UK is likely to hold on to that as we head throughout much of the evening and overnight as well. So underneath those clearing skies, we could see